What do you want out of life? You might answer this question by saying that you want a caring spouse, a good job, and a nice house. But these are really just some of the things you want in life. In asking what you want out of life, I am asking the question in its broadest sense. I am asking not for the goals you form as you go about your daily activities, but for your grand goal in living. In other words, of the things in life you might pursue, which is the thing you believe to be most valuable? Many people have trouble naming this goal. They know what they want minute by minute or even decade by decade during their life, but they have never paused to consider their grand goal in living. It is perhaps understandable that they haven't. Our culture doesn't encourage people to think about such things. Indeed, it provides them with an endless stream of distractions so they won't ever have to. But a grand goal in living is the first component of a philosophy of life. This means that if you lack a grand goal in living, you lack a coherent philosophy of life. Why is it important to have such a philosophy? Because without one, there is a danger that you will mislive. That despite all your activity, despite all the pleasant diversions you might have enjoyed while alive, you will end up living a bad life. There is, in other words, a danger that when you are on your deathbed, you will look back and realize that you have wasted your one chance at living. Instead of spending your life pursuing something genuinely valuable, you squandered it because you allowed yourself to be distracted by the various baubles life has to offer. Suppose you can identify your grand goal in living. Suppose, too, that you can explain why this goal is worth attaining. Even then, there is a danger that you will mislive. In particular, if you lack an effective strategy for attaining your goal, it is unlikely that you will attain it. Thus, the second component of a philosophy of life is a strategy for attaining your grand goal in living. This strategy will specify what you must do as you go about your daily activities to maximize your chances of gaining the thing in life that you take to be ultimately valuable. If we want to take steps to avoid wasting our wealth, we can easily find experts to help us. Looking in the phone book, we will find any number of certified financial planners. These individuals can help us clarify our financial goals. How much, for example, should we be saving for retirement? And having clarified these goals, they can advise us on how to achieve them. Suppose, however, that we want to make steps to avoid wasting not our wealth but our life. We might seek an expert to guide us, a philosopher of life. This individual would help us think about our goals in living and about which of these goals are in fact worth pursuing. She would remind us that because goals can come into conflict, we need to decide which of our goals should take precedence when conflicts arise. She will therefore help us sort through our goals and place them into a hierarchy. The goal at the pinnacle of this hierarchy will be what I have called our grand goal in living. It is the goal that we should be unwilling to sacrifice to attain other goals. And after helping us select this goal, a philosopher of life will help us devise a strategy for attaining it. The obvious place to look for a philosopher of life is in the philosophy department at the local university. Visiting the faculty offices there, we will find philosophers specializing in metaphysics, logic, politics, science, religion, and ethics. We might also find philosophers specializing in the philosophy of sport and the philosophy of philosophy. But unless we are at an unusual university, we will find no philosophers of life in the sense I have in mind. It hasn't always been this way. Many ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, for example, not only thought philosophies of life were worth contemplating, but thought the raison d'être of philosophy was to develop them. These philosophers typically had an interest in other areas of philosophy as well, in logic, for example, but only because they thought pursuing that interest would help them develop a philosophy of life. Furthermore, these ancient philosophers did not keep their discoveries to themselves or share them only with their fellow philosophers. Rather, they formed schools and welcomed as their pupils anyone wishing to acquire a philosophy of life. Different schools offered different advice on what people must do in order to have a good life. Antisthenes, a pupil of Socrates, founded the Cynic school of philosophy, which advocated an ascetic lifestyle. Aristippus, another pupil of Socrates, founded the Cyrenaic school, which advocated a hedonistic lifestyle. In between these extremes, we find among many other schools the Epicurean school, the Skeptic school, and, of most interest to us here, the Stoic school, founded by Zeno of Citium. The philosophy associated with the schools were unapologetic about their interest in philosophies of life. According to Epicurus, for example, vain is the word for a philosopher which does not heal any suffering of man. For just as there is no profit in medicine if it does not expel the diseases of the body, so there is no profit in philosophy either if it does not expel the suffering of the mind. And according to the Stoic philosopher Seneca, about whom I will have much to say in this book, he who studies with a philosopher should take with him some one good thing every day. He should daily return home a sounder man or on the way to become sounder. This book is written for those seeking a philosophy of life. In the pages that follow, I focus my attention on a philosophy that I have found useful and that I suspect many readers will also find useful. It is the philosophy of the ancient Stoics. The Stoic philosophy of life may be old, but it merits the attention of any modern individual who wishes to have a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling, who wishes, that is, to have a good life. In other words, this book offers advice on how people should live. More precisely, I will act as a conduit for the advice offered by the Stoic philosophers 2,000 years ago. This is something my fellow philosophers generally loathe to do, but then again, their interest in philosophy is primarily academic. Their research, that is to say, is primarily theoretical or historical. My interest in Stoicism, by way of contrast, is resolutely practical. My goal is to put the philosophy to work in my life and to encourage others to put it to work in theirs. The ancient Stoics, I think, would have encouraged both sorts of endeavor, but they also would have insisted that the primary reason to study Stoicism is so we can put it into practice.